The takeaway that most people are gonna have from last night's VP debate is that, hey, a fly landed on Mike Pence's head, and I get it, it's very funny, I tweeted about it too, but if not for insects being naturally attracted to Mike Pence, what should have been the big takeaway from last night? I think it should be one thing that has been buttressed and strengthened by other Republican statements since that debate, and that thing is Mike Pence and this answer.
President Trump has several times refused to commit himself to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. If Vice President Biden is declared the winner and President Trump refuses to accept a peaceful transfer of power, what would be your role and responsibility as vice president? What would you personally do? You have 2 minutes.
Well, Susan, first and foremost, I think we're going to win this election. Because while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris rattle off a long litany of the establishment in Washington, D.C., an establishment that Joe Biden's been a part of for 47 years, President Donald Trump has launched a movement of everyday Americans from every walk of life. But when you talk about accepting the outcome of the election, I must tell you, Senator, your party has spent the last 3.5 years trying to overturn the results of the last election.
Okay, so there was a little bit more to it, but none of the other stuff that was to it answered either the question or the concerns that many Americans have that Donald Trump is planning something to overthrow the will of the people. Mike Pence is supposed to be the responsible guy in the room that could hypothetically stop him from doing that. He was given the opportunity to reassure us that he would stand by the Constitution, he would stand by our system, he would stand by democracy, and he declined that opportunity, Yasmin.
Yeah, that was kind of a recurring theme from last night, wasn't it? And you touched on something that I do want to talk about. Mike Pence people think that he's nicer or that he's easier to work with because he's quiet. Before last night, I could barely even remember what his voice sounded like. And then I remembered, that everything that he says it more calmly, less obnoxiously than Donald Trump, but it's just as bad in a lot of ways, if not worse in some ways. And I'm not surprised that he denied it because, at this point, it's very obvious what they're trying to do. And it's not just recently, they've been laying a lot of this groundwork for years, from packing the courts across the entire country, not just the Supreme Court. Even though the Supreme Court, we're not in a great position there either, So it's not surprising, or it shouldn't be surprising to anyone. Of course, he didn't answer the question. He didn't like answering a lot of questions last night. I don't know. I feel like Kamala Harris had a lot and nothing to work with.
Yeah, he dodged every question. Not really surprised by that. It's a debate. He's a politician. That's what they do. But this, I think, rises above. This is a special thing. We want to know that the system that we've had, as many flaws as it's had since its inception, the cracks in it that have been put there ever since then, that we will still be able to count on a peaceful transition of power by what the Constitution demands. And he's saying we're not necessarily gonna have that, or he's not going to step in to make sure that it's the case. And it's not just him. As that debate was going on, Senator Mike Lee, a Republican, tweeted, "We're not a democracy." That's awesome, that's great, from a senator saying, "Hey everybody, we're not a democracy." Now, is he technically correct? They'll say it'll be unbearable, but they'll say, well, technically we're like a republic, a representative democracy, but with Republican aspects to it. Okay, sure. And they'd be totally fine with Barack Obama saying in a speech that we're not a democracy. But he did elaborate because that obviously got a lot of pushback, saying democracy isn't the objective. Liberty, peace, and prosperity is. I think he means prosperity, giving him more credit than he deserves. We want the human condition to flourish. Rank democracy can thwart that. Now, he's using the word rank. What he means is democracy. He means the votes determining the winner can thwart what he thinks prosperity is. But this is Donald Trump. This is so many of them. Democracy doesn't work for a party that can't win elections based on getting more people to vote for them than their opponents. And when that happens time after time, maybe you turn against democracy and maybe you look for something else. Maybe you look for some alternative to democracy that can lock in white minority rule for just a couple more decades, give them the Supreme Court, give them their tax cuts, and they can continue to benefit from a system that they have rigged all along the way. That's what it looks like to me, at least.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting his choice of words of ranked democracy. At first I thought he was talking about ranked choice on ballots, and I was like, oh, that's interesting coming from a Republican. But then it's like, Donald Trump didn't even win the popular vote. So whatever you're advocating for is not in Trump's best interest, unless of course you pack all the courts and then you suppress votes and then you gerrymander, et cetera, all the things that have been happening.
Yeah, no, so we had Pence saying, you know what, whatever happens, it is what it is on election day and afterward. If Trump wants to take it, I'm not gonna stop him. We've got a senator saying, hey, everybody, we're not a democracy. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that if they pulled off their plan to have a state legislature controlled by Republicans, give the electoral votes to a Republican rather than the Democrat that won the vote, hey, we're not actually democracy. Don't get mad, everybody. We're something else. And then you have the big man himself this morning, Donald Trump, calling, I believe it's Maria Bartiromo, and saying this about his political opponents.
No, we're going to get little satisfaction unless I win, and we'll just have to go because I won't forget it. But these people should be indicted. This was the greatest political crime in the history of our country, and that includes Obama and it includes Biden. These are people that spied in my campaign. And we have everything.
Okay, so he thinks that all of these people, past opponents, people like Obama, Hillary Clinton too, because of course lock her up, why not? But Biden too. Barr, the lead law enforcement officer in our entire country, needs to lock up the guy running against him in this election. Now, this is not the first time that he said that. It's certainly not a power move. It's not giving me a lot of confidence that you think you're gonna win this thing, that you're telling the AG that no, you gotta go and you gotta arrest this guy. But this is the president, and this isn't even gonna be news. Honestly, how many people are gonna talk about this? The fact that the president called into a major news network and said, I want the AG to lock up my opponent because it's Trump. We're just like, he does it all the time. What a goof. He's a goof, But I think it's kind of important. I think it's kind of a big thing.
Yeah, I thought it was a fun throwback to 2016 when he kept trying to lock up Hillary Clinton. I was like, oh, that's cute. I see what you did there. But really, it's in the grand scheme of everything we've been dealing with, it's nothing new, but it's also very, very bad. And the difference is in 2015-16, he wasn't empowered with the federal government behind him and an attorney general who literally just does his bidding and doesn't even really deny that at this point. So it is something to be concerned with, and it's not something to be ignored. But at the same time, we got to move on too. We have other stuff to talk about. That's the problem.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're 100% right, and I'm glad that you pointed out that this is different than 2016. In 2016, the conversation was Trump saying he might not accept the results. And look, you want both parties to accept that the result was valid. But the worry wasn't that Trump wasn't going to accept the results and he was going to march into the White House and become president. It was a thing about rhetoric and messaging. As Yasmin very appropriately points out, they're in power now. This is not the same thing. Mike Pence and Donald Trump, they can't technically just declare that they get to remain president for life, but they certainly have a stronger vantage point from which to try to do that. And I just want everyone to bear that in mind. We're gonna move on to other topics, but understand that them all agreeing that this is not a real democracy, Trump gets to decide if he leaves or not, that is sort of a big deal. This is not just some sort of weird hypothetical. They're prepping to do something and everyone needs to be ready. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.